At dawn, the fields east of Anzio were a flat plate of water and stubble, each furrow a mirror that trapped the sky. The canal ran like a black seam through the beet rows, its reeds rimmed with frost. Lieutenant Mark Ellery cupped his hands around the M1 smoke pot as if warming them, then pressed his thumb against the striker. The friction flared hot. A salted hiss became a steady breathing roar that vibrated his palm. White poured out, sweet-smelling and thick. He set the pot on the berm so the wind could take it. Behind him, boots sloshed on the drainage path. First squad rose from the ditch, hunched under packs, moving east along the canal berm under a plan that gave them 10 minutes of cover, no more and no less, before German glass found them and the killing began. He counted seconds on his wristwatch and watched the plume lean away, obedient as a parade flag. Dawn light skimmed the fields and died against a low lid of haze folded over the balloons in the night. Under that lid the smoke didn't rise. It thickened and slid, a white wall stepping across the beats. This was the window. 10 minutes to move a platoon laterally along the ditch and steal a position that would let machine guns enfilade the Natuna road. He had set it at the night briefing and tapped the map. 10 minutes before a breeze, then sun, then thinning. Then they'd be seen. He felt it in his throat and in the cold rubber of the field telephone at his hip and chose to treat the clock like a fuse that was already burning. Sergeant Rosa Bellini had the EE-8, a black handset with a cracked Bakelite mouthpiece smeared in mud. The signal wire ran single strand through reeds into a ground return, a poor man's trick on soggy soil. Crouched in the berm's shadow, a mittened thumb on the transmit, she patched FO-net to the 105s. "Battery able. This is Delta Fox," she bit each word. "Smoke on station. White phosphorus ready on call." The phone line in her other ear crackled with a soft frying noise. She repeated the grid, then duration, then spacing, her voice unhurried on purpose. Clarity was the only control she owned. On the hedgerow marking their right-hand limit, Sepulwit Danner laid the M1919A4 tripod legs into the least waterlogged earth he could find. The ground breathed under it, swallowing points until the cradle tilted left. He cursed, lifted the front leg, replanted, cranked traverse and elevation. Grit in the T&E made the teeth slip and catch half a notch. The lane he had walked last night by compass and red lens looked smaller now, fog and canal steam drawing the world in. He fixed his eye on the road kink near a white milestone thin as a child's finger. That was his bracket. If the smoke held, he'd pinch that gap shut. Ellery popped a second pot, then a third, spacing them like fence posts so their plumes overlapped and welded. Each hiss built a plane cut from air, edges straight as a ruler. He inhaled and coughed. It tasted like burnt matches and damp chalk. He raised the whistle and blew. One short, two long. Step off. On the canal path the platoon moved. A man slipped. A curse popped like a fish. Beyond the smoke, somewhere in the farmhouse lines, German scopes would be coming up. The lane was pre-registered 6 ways. Intelligence had diagrammed it like a chessboard. Smoke was the only answer that didn't buy cover with blood, and he'd already paid by lighting the first pot. Rosa's radio caught the battery net and let a dozen voices leak across one another, call signs hanging like wet laundry. "Able! Able, this is—" Someone stepped on them. "Delta Fox, smoke shells. Interval." She paced the push to talk. "Able, this is Delta Fox. Execute smoke on my mark. Fire for smoke. Repeat, fire for smoke. On my mark." Down the drainage ditch, Ellery bent to the handset and told their own mortars the same. He wanted overlap if the battery lagged. WP would rush high, cool, then settle. He wanted particle sizes filling layers, a texture his platoon could disappear into under the morning's lid. He was counting on that lid to stay shut. The first WP rounds lifted somewhere in the rear with a ghost drill whine. Pale columns bloomed beyond the first wall, edges feathered where wind worried them. Ellery watched the way the pieces touched and pivoted, a geometry solved with fire. He checked his watch. 9 minutes, 8. In his pocket, his midnight forecast, scribbled, "Inversion, likely sea breeze mid-morning." The danger wasn't mid-morning, it was the thin hour between land breeze dying and onshore waking, when air forgot its job. He trusted 10 because the plan did, and because pulling it now would strand men standing in water. The platoon slid along the ditch, ghosts in a white hallway. Water slapped the thighs of the last file. Danner tracked a silhouette, probably theirs, and kept his finger off the butterfly triggers. He rocked the traverse. The T&E balked, then lurched. The front leg sank another inch, and his lane pulled right. He looked up. The smoke sheet wore scallops now, small eddies curling like the edge of a burning paper. A breeze kissed his cheek from behind. The nail-hung compass twitched left, startled. "Wind's veering," someone said, a private in the ditch with a farmer's ear. The word rose in the white and died. Ellery felt it too, a fingertip reversing direction on his ear, the land breath that had been draining toward the sea all night now, hesitating. The sun was up behind them, low, weak, bright enough to silver the canal in a blade-wide strip. He thumbed a pot vent, trying to trim output, making physics small in his hands. He met Rosa's eyes. She had a shoulder into the berm to shield the handset. She raised eyebrows. "Your call." He pretended it wasn't. Watch still said 7 minutes, and shouted to the mortar section, "Keep 'em coming," and to Rosa, "Battery maintain smoke." The handset burr answered with a clipped, "Roger." In his ribs, something accused him of talking to a cold shape. On the hedgerow, Danner leaned into his gun. The wall that should have drifted east to west had become a steady thing to look at. Now the lower edge thickened, stopped, hesitated, like a dog hearing something in another room. 2 fields out in a farmhouse loft, Oberleutnant Karl Voss stood at a window where panes had been pulled to fit his scope. He'd been awake since before dawn, listening to wind play the road wires like strings. A pencil on a thin-lined map, corners pegged by brass tacks, waited in his fingers. The white curtain ate the field. When the sun shouldered up, the curtain rejected light, and the canal behind it shone like a sword. Pre-registered points didn't need courage. They needed a reason. He lifted his glass once and lowered it. The wall was too clean yet. He listened to a board creak and his own breath. Condensation filmed the inside of Danner's goggles. He blinked and snapped them to his forehead. The smoke licked his eyes raw. His frame of reference, the milestone and crooked willow, was milked out. Jaw tight, elbow light on the triggers, he fought the urge to hose a belt into the white just to own something. He shifted his rear foot. Sock water ran cold along his arch. He cranked traverse and felt one tooth skid, stripped, an unfixable hitch baked into his aim that would cost him precision all day. Rosa wiped a thumb across the mouthpiece and set the phone to her ear. The line popped. Moisture had crept into the twisted pair where it crossed a puddle. Today, the ground preferred to eat current. "Smoke! On station! 5 minutes more!" came Able Battery, clean once, then the radio net bled into the same ear, call signs like a crowded bar. "Say again! Able! Say again!" She slowed, not faster. "Delta Fox to Able, maintain, interval as ordered." She spent seconds you couldn't see because the words had to arrive whole. Ellery should have called a grace period, gambled on momentum to finish the shift under thinning cover. He had enough white in the air to keep them from going naked. Enough sun behind that, if it came, a sea breeze would push everything out. He checked the compass because the hairs on his neck had a direction. The needle twitched left. He looked at the plume near his hand. Instead of streaming westward, it billowed chest-high and flattened, scudding back down the berm toward their own trenches like spilled milk. WP drifted downrange and broke with rips and sighs. Hot newborn smoke rose, met the cold lid, and thought better of rising. Larger bits cooled and fell. Pools formed. They stopped expanding forward and thickened in place, seeking low spots, footwells, dugout mouths. Canal reeds leaned toward them, frost streamers snapping. Ellery's 10-minute wall decided it was a blanket. The blanket slid. Behind them, the sun climbed. The way it cut smoke changed. Scattered light sharpened the gradient. In the white, men weren't silhouettes against dark now, but against a canal stripe turned glass. A lifted arm became a cutout puppet on a glowing screen. Danner saw his own shadow thrown sideways, black against luminous milk. He understood in a flash that they were lit. He lowered his goggles. They fogged. He took them off and squinted, everything close wet and too bright. He tracked light on the canal like a hunter watching a wing flash. Rosa heard it first, a side platoon line riding the wire in from the hedgerow. Smoke in our teeth, clipped, breathless. The wire between wooden stakes thumped, the coil near her knee jerked. She mashed the handset so hard, mud left a crescent on her cheek. Say again, smoke, say again. The same voice came back thinner. It's coming back. Then the radio barged through with a shouted, "Check fire on 3, check fire." Not for them, and the EE-8 chirred like a cricket. She looked up. The white had gone from wall to crawling thing. Ellery watched the smoke's edge lose definition. A see-through seam appeared a foot off the ground and narrowed. The land breeze died. The sea drew breath, the first shallow and sneaky, a cat shifting weight. He knew the physics and felt the betrayal. He lifted the whistle and set it down. There was nowhere to whistle them that didn't require walking into a thing he'd made dangerous. The mortars kept popping. Their cadence carried a simple sentence. "We're doing what you told us." In the loft, Voss dared the edge. Shoulder to window, face tipping into cold air, he saw the far side stir and light curl along the smoke's belly. He raised binoculars and hunted movement, not form. Fog couldn't dissolve motion. There, a stutter, man shapes in profile kicked sideways by the retreating wall. Pencil touched map, a short correction from TRP-14. Battery ready, into his throat mic, body behind the wall. Drop 200, right 50, fire for effect. Danner felt the crude spine punch of fear that says, "Get small." He lay belly to the hedge, eye to sight, nothing but brightness and smoke grain. He eased the belt into the tray and braced his left on the charging handle. If he had to fire blind, muscle memory would be continuity when nothing else was. Periphery. The canal throwing light into the air as if a second world bled through. He glanced toward Ellery, trying to read a plan and posture. Rosa caught the battery clean for 2 seconds. Abel's voice hardwired pure. "Maintain smoke. Copy. 2 minutes remaining." And had to decide whether to wait for Ellery's nod to countermand. The net was a muddle, the telephone a wet snake, every syllable fighting for audience. She over-enunciated, "Negative. Stand by on smoke. Stand." The word drowned under overlapping call signs. She went to the phone and shouted, "Cease smoke. Repeat, cease smoke on my—" The wire popped. Water drummed where it sagged across the canal. Ellery chose wrong by choosing nothing. He watched the clock because he needed the plan to exist for seconds longer. 10 more seconds. 5. The smoke nearest his boots made the decision, rolling over the berm like a slow wave. The lane, the hedgerow, the gun. The men were swallowed in one breath, seen and unseen. The haze hesitated, then rolled toward them, swallowing the gun and the lane in a single breath. Danner's world compressed to a milky rectangle. He toggled the safety on and off, ears hunting the slosh of boots without a direction. A helmet brim and a reed wore the same shape. He ran a fingertip along the sticky T&E and felt the stripped tooth again, the damage now a compass error baked into steel. Rosa's line sang, an electric fizz that tasted like metal on her tongue. See smoke. Repeat, see smoke. She laid each brick of a word true, but the answer broke into 2 syllables and static. Ground return, meant to save them, had turned the sod into a thief. Current ran into every puddle that wanted it. She flipped to radio. The net spat stacked call signs. Red dog, stand by, someone said over them, and another voice pleaded about a half-track. For once she chose speed over diction. See smoke. Correction inbound. Ellery struck a second pot out of habit, heard it hiss into inversion like a whisper under a blanket, watched the cloud dip, cool, crawl back. He thumbed a third, stopped mid-motion as the plume collapsed into his boots. He'd made a line of blindfolds. The minutes he promised his men were already eaten. He pressed mud to paint and felt heat through glove leather. Some choices are irreversible before they finish leaving your mouth. Across the field, curls missing from a tile roof like bad teeth, Voss raised his binoculars. He didn't need detail, only contrast. The white also gave that, cut-out black figures against brightening sky. Pencil tapped the map, traced to a target reference point. A haystack burned down to memory, but useful for math. He risked an inch more lean. If the Americans stayed blind for 5 minutes, he could walk the battery in and never have to lift his head again. Witt heard German guns first, barn doors slammed by a storm far off, then nearer, ripening. He planted tripod legs deeper until the sod ate them another half-inch. The bubble in the spirit level slid cockeyed. WP Fleck hissed on his sleeves and died where damp wool kissed it. He yawed the sightline left and right. All he widened was the fog. A cough a man couldn't suppress broke somewhere. He kept the safety on, finger set. Rosa got a phrase sawn by static. Smoke in our teeth. The wire slapped where it looped across the canal between dew-bright reeds. She dragged it higher up the berm. Her fingers came away slick and black. She could keep yelling, "See smoke," a command that still demanded hands and time, or she could switch to workable correction, a bearing and lift for the 105s to turn fog into fence again. She picked the path the battery could hear. Ellery moved along the berm by feel, counted paces to a pot, kicked the casing into wetter ground to drown it. It smoked angrily, hissed, then sulked, the air stinking like a match lost in a cellar. Rosa shoved the handset at him. He said the halt code, then plain language, voice flattening as if fog ate tone as well as light. Buying visibility cost him the only cover he owned. Voss felt his bracket lock. "On," he said to the battery. "Fire for effect." Discipline dulled fear. He didn't smile, smiling creased eyes, and the glass lied when eyes folded. He felt the loft boards underfoot and put weight where he knew they were stronger. The first German shell landed long in a flooded furrow that threw a wall of brown water high, then cracked like an afterthought. The second fell short, the bracket walking in. Mud fleck rang on an ammo can, lid like a bell. Witt flinched, then froze. He knew the pattern stepping toward his lane would make it a neat circle on a map. He hissed to his aide, "Hold." His trigger hand wanted to write names into the white, with tracers. He denied it. Rosa's radio took 2 voices at once. Red Dog Actual and Blackjack to all stations. Doors in a fire. She pressed transmit like weight could tilt chance and said, "Cease smoke. Order pending. Confirm. Correction to follow. Stand by for smoke orientation shift." The wire buzz deepened. She picked the line from a flooded boot print and set it on a drier clod. The hiss softened a hair. Not much. Enough. Ellery slumped to a knee. Kneeling only sank him deeper in cold. He called it, "Smoke 105 WP, airburst low. On my line. 1 round. Then repeat every 20 seconds. 300 in front. Let the wind carry." He gambled the onshore would finish waking and push the veil away from their teeth. He knew he was asking perfect timing from men he couldn't see. Whit pitched his voice low. On me. On me. Not a shout, a weight men could step toward inside a white box. He drew a line with a boot heel. The butterfly triggers under his fingers felt like skin, not steel. He decided to be a hinge, not a lid, ready to swing if a slit came. Voss heard in the net the note that meant the bracket was good. Fire for effect, he repeated, then held his neck still. The first effect round's thud climbed through the loft timbers into his thighs. If nothing changed in 20 seconds, he owned this stretch of field. He didn't know far out over the oil-wet sea the breeze had already strengthened its hand. The first of Ellery's reoriented smoke rounds burst low. White rain seared, then cooled, a ragged curtain at first. Then the wind found a grip, torn pieces aligned. He needed the repeats to stitch it. He needed Rosa to force the battery to hear. He needed Voss not to saw the wire in half with a luck round right now. He asked too much and asked anyway. Rosa broke her own habit and spoke like telegraph. On my line, fire, 20 seconds, repeat. She timed by her pulse. Overlapping call signs swamped her endings. She crammed the beginnings into gaps. She pulled the wire another handspan onto the berm above a puddle that had grown into a mirror. If her words arrived, the smoke could be made to behave. Whit sensed change before he saw it. The light inside the fog dimpled, then a ribbon opened, as if a knife had drawn through it. A letter slot. He saw the ditch line, his men's shoulders, a black rectangle of farmhouse loft with a man inside, thumbnail small, hands lifting. He moved the gun 2 inches his aide had begged for minutes ago. He didn't fire yet. Voss saw the slit, too. The wall trembled under wind. Light drew along its belly. He pressed glass to eyes, breath fogging and clearing his view. He tucked the binoculars hard and tasted smoke that wasn't his. He took air to call correction and found his throat coated in phosphorus tang. The next rounds were already in the air. The wire hummed higher in Rosa's hand until her teeth hurt, then dropped like a string snapped. Her handset went dead for a half breath, a silence that had pressure. She slapped the cradle as if this were a kitchen phone and hated herself for the reflex even while doing it. Ellery looked. They both knew that in the second that mattered, the tie to the guns had gone soft. Far out, friendly shells picked up cadence. They had to choose which hammer to trust. The slit widened a finger's width. The wind pulsed with the sea's rhythm, a slow inhale dropping the curtain, an exhale lifting it. Ellery gave Whit a nod he couldn't see. On your mark, he mouthed. He gambled the whole platoon on a breath and a correction. A shell landed close enough to buck the ground under Whit's knees. Canal water jumped. The tripod chattered. Springs chirped. Whit's finger found the trigger and paused. The letter slot opened a hair wider. A figure in the loft turned at the same instant. The wire sizzled like bacon in oil and then went silent, and the first German rounds bracketed the lane, thudding closer while water hissed on insulation. Ellery felt the shock through boot soles before the bang, the concussion slapping smoke into ripples. He didn't repeat himself. See smoke, he on my mark, new grid. He chose to kill his own shield and punch back at the eye. He pointed at the loft as if that helped. Orders, once spoken, dragged iron whether you loved them or not. Rosa chopped his call into pieces a gun crew could swallow. See smoke, fire mission he, shift right 3, drop 50. Farm loft bearing 218, she added. Smoke in our teeth, to make an unseen sergeant at a gun pit picture the inversion pinning aerosols. The response was a scratchy shift, could have been acknowledgement or echo. She took it as consent and moved the wire high again, knuckles cold to the bone. Whit jammed a stick under the rear leg to free the gum traverse and threw his back into the knob. The teeth groaned and gave. The head swung 2 inches, then 3. To move, he had to stand a heartbeat taller than he wanted. He timed it between thuds and stole the movement. In the white, he knew he'd made a silhouette someone elevated could draw around. He did it anyway. Another HE went short into the canal bank. A wall of water whipped the wire. Rosa tasted iron where she'd bitten her cheek, but didn't stop talking on the radio. The phone danced and died. The wireless carried what it could. She watched the first bend where the line crossed open ground, like a mother watching a child's head in a crowd. Voss missed by a finger's width, geysers promising and useless. He checked his watch. How much longer before the onshore set steady? Fisherman's weather repurposed for guns. He thought the breezes he knew as a boy would outlast the American improvisation. Feuerwalze, he asked, a rolling barrage if they could spare it. If steel could cover a lane, sight didn't matter. Ellery caught a roof scribble burned into fog. The wind flicked and the smoke listened. He flattened his voice and pushed another correction. Add 20, left 1. He wanted the first blast to make Voss tuck his head, break the chain-walking death toward the hedgerow. Numbers were all the mercy he had. Witt's move bought a new wedge. The white thinned. He saw a figure slide along the ditch bank and squeezed a short burst, 3 rounds, more warning than kill. Presence and direction. The recoil steadied him like a metronome. He knew he'd just told every ear where he was. He let that be a cost. Rosa's voice tried to quit. She coughed smoke and kept it low. Repeat, repeat, he. She added the emergency continuation code out of training memory. The handset shook like something alive. She couldn't tell if that meant salvation or a shock waiting. If he landed where Ellery asked, they'd get a window. If not, Voss's bracket would peel them out of their ditch. Voss thundered down the stair, boots heavy on old wood. He slid into a lower room where a small window sliced the field. He winced as grit ground under eye cups and looked anyway. Seeing was the only currency he had. He sent the next adjustment, voice flat, so breathing didn't write panic over numbers. He kept a retreat in mind now. Lofts were gallows when he learned your address. Ellery felt the first true onshore, cool fingers on his neck, and the white above sheared, slatting, reforming into the taller wall they wanted an hour ago. Correction too late for entry, maybe right for exit. He called it, cease smoke, no more pots, no more WP. Let the sea lift what was killing them and use the slits, not the blanket. Witt heard cease from somewhere and knew instant obedience was a fairy tale. Pots died hard. He held the lane with patience he didn't feel. Belt in, feed clean, eyes on where the next thinness would be. He kept still in a white that punished motion more than speech. Rosa sprinted low to the nearest pot and capped it with her coat, pressing wet wool onto a throat, fighting to spit it off. The hiss bit through fabric. Her palm burned, clean bright pain shooting to the elbow, and she kept the coat on anyway until the sound went from roar to sulk. 1 pot less, 1 slit more. Voss reacquired the hedgerow. The sun came clean for a second. Contrast jumped, as if a white pencil outlined every edge. He drank 3 facts: gun position, a figure capping a pot, a mouth speaking into a handset. He started a correction and felt the air thicken on his scalp, the animal sense of an inbound. Experienced sutured sensation to sequence. He breathed to save his skull. Ellery seized the letterbox moment. Through it he had Witt's crew, the roofline, the canal's steel glare. He put numbers on the wire like nails and said, "On, add 10, fire for effect." If the battery heard him clean once, a loft would stop being a loft. Witt felt the sky snap from furry to hard. He sent a mean, short burst across the slit, not to hunt, but to state. He waited for the house to answer, for the guns behind to argue. The slit narrowed. He took his finger off and reset grip. The slit opened in the milky wall, for a breath everyone could see. And everyone was seen. Ellery went first. Bearings shouted into air that felt honest for once, a correction stitched to a coordinate etched since dawn. His voice chased along posts slick with dew to gunners waiting for numbers, not apologies. He could see the lane, Witt's gun hunched, the loft just high enough for an eye and pencil. If the battery slid 20 mils, the next white could lie down in front of German glass, not behind it. Rosa wedged deeper in the ditch, handset printing mud on her face. The wire behaved in the lull. She repeated Ellery's call, compressing pauses, eyes on a compass needle that shivered as the breeze decided its life. She chose speed and cut the ends of her words off. Beginnings were what men in noise heard. Witt leaned the tripod, boots sucking at mud. Traverse sticky, elevation gritty, the M1919A4 would throw a belt if asked. The canal of light down the road would betray any runner. He wanted to fire to herd his own men faster. Firing would write a tracer line for Voss. He held. Waiting was work. Voss didn't waste breath. The slit was the page he needed. He aligned pencil with the road and canal, called a pre-registered concentration and a minor correction that meant agony to men, waist-deep in cold. His 10.5s did not need sight, only a point, and crews that kept count in their bones. The lull stitched itself shut, lazily cruel. Smoke fell, remembering the lid. WP that had risen cooled and crawled, bedding into low air, sliding along ground toward friendly trenches and Witt's hedge. Pots burning couldn't be unlit with a word. Cease would take minutes and pain. Ellery saw edges blur. The slit became a seam, then vanished under gauze. A shell landed where the slit had been. Water and soil geysered, and then the shrapnel hiss ran through fog. The bracket was tight. Rosa tried, repeat, repeat. But water-slapping insulation turned words to weather. Radio caught 2 overlapped call signs and a code word with no mate. She couldn't know who heard. Ellery had to pick his poison, persist and go blind, trust a screen that had become a shroud, or kill smoke and bet the onshore would lift enough to let his guns see corrections. He swallowed, felt a shell slap water nearer, the tickle in wrist bones through the handset. He killed the shield and concentrated the hurt. He, on my mark, new grid. Witt heard it like a verdict. He shook his head at a hand on a smoke wick and jutted 2 fingers. Snuff. Rifle butts hammered lids, hisses dwindled. The pots went from roar to black-rimmed sullen. Air thinned by degrees, like a pain you finally stop touching. Voss felt betrayal. The white that had backlit Americans thinned too early, fraying in place. He kept his fire walking forward, not where they were, but where they'd be if they bolted. He leaned a hair too far over the sill. The binoculars caught a flash that could be canal or puddled field. He wrote a correction anyway. When visibility improved, this loft would be a target. Rosa made the wire behave by force and trick. She scraped lacquer, wrapped copper, stabbed a bayonet into mud for a better ground, and talked into her cupped hand to baffle wind. She ran the grid twice, identical, rhythm over grammar. Someone out there had been trained to hear repetition as emergency. German rounds came honest now, left, a hair right, then into the hedgerow's top board, a crack that dropped a lattice of twigs like dice. A crewman came up with a bright red scrape down his cheek, fine as a paper cut. Witt answered with 3 fast rounds, the gun saying "move" to his men and "here" to glass. The breeze chose steady at last, onshore and indifferent. Salt found its way past phosphorus stink. Ellery felt the morning the way it was supposed to be, a regular sea breath, late but reliable. Without feeding, smoke tore into flags on low wire. He had to align those torn banners with his guns, not suffocate in them. He timed by breath and battery cadence. If Rosa's splice held for a heartbeat, the 105s would welcome numbers. He found a thinner piece of haze where canal glare lit smoke from below. Silhouettes sharpened. He saw the loft's dark geometry and pushed numbers again, this time without pleading. He answered with colorless sound. The nearest round kissed a rooftop 2 houses down from the bully loft. Tiles leapt and shattered. The loft stuttered, boards flexed, and the second shell hit near the canal, a graceful arc of mud that fell as knives. Voss dropped and thought angles, not revenge. Wit stole the moment. He and his second collapsed the gun, legs kicked, cradle freed, shroud slapped with a mitten until it quit biting. The traverse and elevation, still gummy, fought. Mud sucked tripod feet as if trying to keep them. They shouldered it along the hedge, using the ditch like a trench, feet pulling free with a small obscene kiss each step. He expected German rounds to follow logic and dreading that competence. Rosa heard a single clean word. On. For a minute, between sizzled insulation and crowded airwaves, the system worked. She saw where it bit by watching smoke's leading edge lift under concussion like laundry in a gust. On target, she sent and disliked the phrase even while signing it. Ellery risked a peek. The canal lay flat as glass between gusts, mirroring a tired silver sky. In it, if you looked wrong, men appeared who hadn't been there a second ago. He told his people the truth. Smoke off, he on the loft, lateral shift has to finish now under torn cover. He heard acceleration as instruction took root in fear. Voss weighed staying, a god you can bore into mercy by not moving. He kept the pattern tight, forward 1, left 1, a chalk eraser for lanes. He put the eyepiece up and saw white, then a sharp rectangle where roof had been, then a brightening on water as the sun crawled under smoke. He sent a last correction like a signature on a letter he didn't think would arrive in time. The next he found more wood than air. A wall panel peeled and fluttered into the yard. The loft gave up its pretense, inches and splinters now. Voss slid, boots finding the stair by muscle memory, trading height for survivability. Wit felt the bracket slide away from his old spot. Sound moved down the road where silhouettes had been seconds ago. He planted the tripod in a dryer patch, kicked legs wide, worked the traverse back and forth to scrape clay out of teeth. The belt arced up. He waited. His finger kissed steel and waited harder. Ellery threw small, fast nudges into the net, painterly, push, pull, shaping bad air into usable cover. He prepped one more smoke line, but not on them. Thin WP over the far bank to blind any eye that replaced Voss. He wanted the sink to happen where it hurt someone else. Pride had to crack for that idea to fit. Rosa told the platoon what mattered. New smoke goes on them, not us. She said it twice, a third time for men whose fear outshouted radio. The wire trembled with hits. She looked at spent pots, black mouths, one sulking coal, and set her jaw. 10-minute boxes on a clipboard had become an hour of 4-minute disasters. The next minutes had to be theirs. Reoriented WP arrived as ordered and behaved like the day, erratic, then faithful. Bursts high over the far bank swelled and cooled, then dropped obediently. The breeze lifted enough to plant the new wall on the enemy side before it settled. For the first time since dawn, the curtain lay where the story needed it, between pencil and prey. Wit moved his men without noise. Names, shoulder taps, a runner low, then he himself, dragging the gun's tail. Mud resisted, let go, resisted. Boots filled and emptied. The breeze touched their backs. German he detonated behind them in a rhythm now wrapped in fog that hid nothing useful. Ellery had one more decision to spend. Keep he on the farmhouse for 30 seconds, then smoke heavy on that line, then nothing. He trusted Wit to cut the gap, Rosa to hold the wire long enough to land the last phrase, the guns to be as they'd been all morning, drilled and deaf to drama. Voss settled behind a low wall that smelled like lime. Binoculars rested on his knees. He let eyes unknit. He listened for the tone that meant his 10 pohavs were waiting, and heard instead the flattening that comes when everyone's smoke ends and the wind chooses an afternoon. He flexed the fingers that still wanted their pencil and accepted sightlessness as the next cost. The last 105s arrived like hard applause. They ripped the farmhouse edge, and then, as if obeying something outside of orders, the firing thinned. Rosa felt the line lighten, voices redraw into calmer words, static go ordinary. She wrapped insulation back on her splice and cinched friction tape that hated wet. Down the ditch, men moved in air that smelled more like morning than chemicals. Witt checked the lane from his new post. Same math, different angles. He set the gun, leveled the bubble through dried film, placed men in shallow places with roots to tall, if needed. He stared across open ground that had memory in its taste. He would shoot through slits now, not under a blanket. Ellery nudged the last warm pot with his boot. Its lid spun into a puddle. Rag-thin smoke clung to wires and low fence like tattered flags. The canal took back reflections. The onshore decided itself, steady and simple. He raised his hand where Witt could see the shape, and Rosa could hear the click. Second squad would have 20 seconds to make the next ditch before the next correction went in. Rosa wiped mud from her cheek with the back of a burned hand, checked the watch she'd been punishing all morning, and put 2 fingers up. 20 count, then move. The handset hummed, not screaming now, just alive. Witt settled his thumb on the safety, eyes in the slit, belt lifted. In the farmhouse yard, dust still hung. He let the gun rest on bone, not muscle, and waited for a shape that wasn't theirs. Voss pressed his palm flat to the map, felt the paper's grit, and touched the square his guns would cover if he asked. He listened for the wind under the smoke and the next order he'd have to give. Ellery breathed in the damp iron smell, pointed toward the gap, and opened his mouth to send them. The breeze slid across his teeth, the canal flashed, boots shifted. Then he gave the mark.